Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the GSA AFU webinar series on the Age-Friendly University Initiative. The series is made possible through a grant from the Retirement Research Foundation to the Academy for Gerontology and Higher Education, AFU, for the Founders 3.0 project. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the GSA website. We'll send a notice to all attendees once the recording is available. We'll have a question and answer session that will follow today's presentation, and we'll be accepting questions through the question feature that's accessible on the GoToWebinar panel if you look for it now. And also located on the panel is a downloadable handout for today, which is titled Becoming an Age-Friendly University Global Partner. In that handout is information about becoming a partner that I'll discuss later in the webinar. So to begin, let me tell you a little bit about the webinar series. The webinar series was developed by a group of AFU colleagues whose institutions were among the first in the U.S. to endorse the Age-Friendly University Principles and to join the AFU Network. I'm Joann Montepare, and I'm the director of the FUS Center for Research on Aging and Intergenerational Studies at Lasell College. Lasell joined the AFU Network in 2015. Today, my colleague Kim Farah, who is professor of chemistry and environmental studies at Lasell, will be presenting with me in this first webinar. In our webinar, which is entitled Becoming an Age-Friendly University Partner, Kim and I will describe why higher education needs to be more age-friendly, and we'll also talk about the vision of the AFU initiative and how your institution can join the network. Carrie Andrioletti and Andrea June will present the second webinar in February. Their webinar is entitled One Vision, Many Paths, Making an Age-Friendly University Work for You. In that webinar, they'll discuss how different institutions are approaching their AFU vision, and they'll give you some examples about how your institution can draw on its distinctive strengths to realize the AFU principles. Nina Silverstein and Marilyn Gallucci will present the final webinar that's entitled A Starting Point for Looking at Age Friendliness in My Campus. AFU Can Help. And in this webinar, they'll discuss some of the data gathering approaches that you can use to explore your institution's age-friendly assets as well as your gaps and opportunities. They'll also talk about how AFU can be an AFU resource for you and your institution. In today's webinar, I'm going to begin by making the case about why higher education needs to be more age-friendly. Kim will then talk about how the AFU initiative came about, and she'll walk you through the AFU principles and pillars. And then I'll come back and I'll finish up by talking about how your institution can join the network, and I'll offer some suggestions for bringing the AFU initiative to your campus. So, in making the case for more age-friendly campuses, I'm going to outline several points that may not sound new or surprising to some of you. However, I think they're really important to review for two primary reasons. First, they serve as the foundation upon which the Age-Friendly University Initiative was established, and importantly, they remind us of the many ways that our aging population can impact and be impacted by higher education. So let's begin. We know that our populations are aging. We see this locally, nationally, and globally. And as one of my students recently said, changing demographics are a defining issue of our time. We also know that aging populations have far-reaching implications on many fronts. And in the case of higher education, there's several implications that are worth noting. With aging populations, we're also seeing a rise in the number of adults putting off retirement and continuing to work for a number of reasons. We know that they're doing this because they have needed income. They're doing it with respect to professional development and personal development. And not only have we seen a rise in the number of adults who are delaying retirement, we are also seeing that this is expected to continue and will impact individuals across a wide age range. AARP's recent multi-year initiative and fact-finding report on the future of work at age 50+ found that many adults are interested in programs that are delivered in higher education settings. They want programs that can advance their skills to continue in their present work, as well as to explore some new career paths. You also have to consider that educational settings have the great capacity to offer support to older workers and retirees through a range of programs, such as those that are related to financial planning, counseling services, and other support services. And to complete the picture, it's important to recognize that these shifting demographics are adding to a bigger profile of our workforce being more age diverse. And that's going to include younger adults, for example, individuals 25 to 45 years old, who are also looking to higher education for degree completion, advanced training, certification, and other educational needs. Aging populations also mean an increase in the demand for a workforce with training in gerontology, and of course, higher education can help to provide this training. At the same time, aging populations are expanding employment opportunities beyond gerontology per se. Our aging is changing the nature of our consumer market for goods and services across a wide variety of sectors. You can think about changes that we're seeing in technology, travel, entertainment, home design, fashion, urban planning, and even more. So employers, employees, and entrepreneurs cannot function in this new market space without some expertise in aging. And again, higher education can help to support this expertise. Aging demographics are also having rippling effects on the nature of our student population. In Massachusetts, and I'm sure in your states, we're seeing a reduction in the number of traditional college-age students. Now, we know this is a complicated picture with respect to why it's happening, but the fact is it's happening. And the reduction of traditional age students, coupled with older students who are returning to school for degree completion and new skill training, as I just described, will compel our institutions to make way for a more age-diverse student population. We also know that research has shown that large number of older adults consider themselves to be lifelong learners. The success of the Osher Lifelong Institutes across our country is a great example of this. However, advocates of lifelong learning argue that now is the time for a more contemporary age-integrated approach that calls for, quote, moving older learners from the margins in higher education to the mainstream. So we really need to think about ways to provide older adults with broader and more direct access to educational opportunities that are out there. And another side of professional development is also emerging. That is, older adults are looking to apply their life experience to address social problems through volunteering and what's come to be described as Encore Careers, which are career paths in the second half of life that combine continued income, personal meaning, and social impact. Again, higher education can offer a terrific anchor for this professional interest through programs that support Encore learners and doers. And later, we'll note, as Kim talks about the AFU Principles, that older adults can also be a new source of support for teaching and learning in higher education. Now, we know the benefits of lifelong learning and engagement on individuals' health and well-being, but it's also important to consider that these benefits extend beyond individuals. Healthier older adults make for healthier communities through their engagement that serves the well-being of people of all ages. In 2018, the Older Americans Month celebrated the theme Engage at Every Age, which emphasized that you're never too old or too young to take part in activities that enrich your physical, your mental, and your emotional well-being. And it also celebrated the ways in which older adults make a difference in our communities. And lifelong learning via higher education can certainly help to keep this ball rolling. So here's a question for you. Has anyone in the audience been on a budget committee or recently sent a child to college? Then expect there are lots of heads nodding out there in the audience. We know that higher education is struggling with rising costs and their consequences. And a good case can be made that an engaged older population can help to support the fiscal well-being of higher education through a variety of paths. So an age-friendly campus can offer new opportunities for program development. We can see increases in new enrollments. We can forge new partnerships. We can attract new support from funders, and I'd argue these are only a few of the possibilities. So thus far, I've given you a number of reasons why higher education needs to engage older adults more. However, in order to make the case for a more age-friendly campus that welcomes older learners, I know it's important to ask who else benefits. And I think the answer to this question is simple. We all do. An age-friendly campus calls for expanding knowledge about aging and the longevity dividend to younger students. And we know that the vast majority of students at our institutions are graduating with negligible knowledge about aging unless they happen to find our way into one of the few courses in the curriculum that teaches about aging. And this simply needs to change. We're doing a great disservice to students by not helping them gain competency around issues that will have a tremendous personal and professional consequence for them. And this is the case no matter what their college major is. I'd also argue that we're doing a great disservice to students by not offering them opportunities to interact with different generations of people. And I've learned firsthand at Lasell College, where I teach, and which is also home to our university-based retiring community, Lasell Village, that there's great power in intergenerational exchange. And this power impacts not only students, but it also impacts faculty and is a benefit to their teaching and learning. Whether the topic be about aging or at Lasell, we also integrate intergenerational exchange in courses on the environment, politics, civil rights, fashion, and even forensic science. And teaching and learning can be brought to new levels with age diversity and intergenerational exchange. It's also important to recognize that institutions that are more age-friendly have consequences beyond our campuses. Specifically, they have consequences for the communities around our campuses. And many of these communities are also exploring how they can meet the needs and interests of their aging populations. And our institutions can be valuable partners in these efforts. And as you see on this slide, our colleagues at UMass Boston have been helping Boston and their neighboring towns assess how they can prepare for aging in their communities. And communities just can't easily do this in any systematic or sizable way without some assistance from local colleges and universities that have expertise with respect to research design and content around aging. And on an even bigger level, more age-friendly, age-diverse, age-integrated campuses can certainly play a vital role in addressing widespread and insidious ageism, which we know in part is fueled by age-segregated institutions and communities. And certainly, last but not least, I'll ask you another question. Is there anyone in the audience who would not advocate for greater support of research on aging at our institutions? Again, I expect there's a lot of nodding going on in the audience. And I'd like to say with respect to research, simply this. Research on aging not only generates new knowledge, but it also provides guidance about how to use the knowledge for the greater good of individuals and communities. And so age-friendly efforts on any front, on our campuses or in our communities, simply aren't possible with more attention to research on aging at our institutions. So you've heard a lot, and the next question becomes, how does all this fit together with the creation of the Age-Friendly University Initiative? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the webinar over to Kim, who will give you some background about how the AFU initiative came about, and then she'll walk you through the AFU pillars and principles.
Joann, thank you for that introduction. As Joann said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the AFU pillars and principles, and then Joann will come back in the latter part of the webinar. So the AFU Age-Friendly University Initiative really reflects the work of an international interdisciplinary team that was convened by Professor Brian McCraith, who is the president of Dublin City University in Ireland, and this started in 2012. The initiative was in part inspired by Ireland's vision for being a more age-friendly country as part of the World Health Organization's community initiative. Included in the DCU team that was formed were educators, researchers, administrators, and also community partners. The result of their work was the AFU initiative that outlined 6 AFU pillars and 10 AFU principles, and they invited institutions across the globe to join the pioneering AFU network. The AFU initiative aligns closely with AGI's mission of fostering the commitment of higher education to the field of aging through education, research, and public service. In 2016, Augie endorsed the AFU principles, and the institutions represented on today's panel were among the first in the United States to join the network. In just several short years, the AFU initiative has become an international movement, and the network has grown to over 40 institutions in the United States, throughout Europe, Canada, and beyond. So the AFU framework is built around the 7 pillars of activity in higher education, and those are shown on this slide. These also reflect the points that Joann raised for making the case for the more age-friendly campuses that we're looking to move to. From the pillars, the DCU team then articulated the 10 AFU principles that are shown here. The principles provide the guiding framework that institutions can use to develop their age-friendly mission, programs, policies, and partnerships, as well as they can be used to identify gaps and opportunities for other age-friendly efforts. Given the short time that we have in this webinar, we'll only briefly discuss the principles to show you how they reflect the pillars and the earlier points raised. The next 2 webinars will provide more detail about how different institutions are approaching the AFU principles. As you see here, principles 1 and 8 speak to lifelong learning and educational access for older learners to the core activities of the institution. These core activities include educational and research programs, as well as the broader health, wellness, arts, and cultural activities offered by universities. Many institutions are well positioned to meet these principles. For example, older adults can take courses as paying credit students, and at some institutions also as non-paying auditing students. As well, many institutions have a range of cultural activities that draw older community members to their campuses. Things such as art exhibits, theater performances, film series, concerts, and the like. Moving on to principles 2, 3, and 5, these call for institutions to promote personal and professional career development for an age-diverse student population through a range of routes. Colleges and universities, we feel, are uniquely positioned to do this. Courses and degree offerings, certifications, continuing education, graduate programs are all hallmarks of academic institutions, and they can serve older adults that are interested in advanced job training and or new careers. Online programs are expanding across campuses and can be tailored to older learners' needs and interests. Existing resources in career counseling and placement could also be extended to older returning students. Principles 4 and 7 call for the need to advance education about aging competency and also to incorporate intergenerational exchange into teaching and learning. Augie educators have long advocated for this, knowing the importance of aging literacy and intergenerational connections. They've used a variety of methods to advance students' appreciation of the longevity dividend and to bring older and younger learners together in classrooms. Thus, we have substantial information to draw on to meet these principles. An age-friendly university institution focuses research attention on the needs of an aging society and also aims to increase public discourse about how higher education can respond to aging populations. A point to note here is the importance of building connections between research efforts and public discourse. This can both inform research and also help to translate research into practice. Lastly, principles 9 and 10 speak to the need for institutions to connect with community. This includes an institution's own retired community, as well as groups and organizations that are, quote, off campus that represent aging populations. Thus, the AFU initiative has really an aspirational, comprehensive vision that calls for connections across campuses, but also beyond campuses to come together around aging. Last year, AGI conducted a survey of 20 of its institutional representatives familiar with the AFU framework about the AFU programs, practices, and partnerships on their campuses, and the extent to which they mapped onto the 10 principles that I just described. The institutions ranged from two-year institutions to four-year undergraduate institutions and to larger research universities. I think it's important to point out that though the title is age-friendly universities, it can be applied to any institute of higher education. Institutional representatives were asked whether each of the principles was met, and if so, to what extent. Fully, partially, or not at all. They were also asked the extent to which the principle was not and unlikely to be adopted. The responses across all principles are shown in this table. As you can see, respondents felt that many of the principles were met to some extent, and if not, they could be met with some program development. Thus, it's clear that our colleges and universities are very much poised to respond to the call to be more age-friendly and to begin digging into the principles in exciting and strategic ways. So for today's purposes, we just want to discuss a few insights that we gained from the survey responses of the representatives. Campus insights. Although higher education is offering educational programs to students of all ages, there's still a good deal of room to explore the more specific needs and interests of the non-traditional age students. There's also room to develop more age-friendly initiatives around health, wellness, arts, and other cultural activities. For example, collaborations between aging centers and gerontology programs and other centers and programs are a way to extend the age-friendly focus. For example, at our institution, Lasell College, a predominantly undergraduate institution, our aging center co-sponsors a number of events with other centers, like the Women's History Month event we host with the Donahue Institute for Ethics, Diversity, and Inclusion that brings together an intergenerational panel of speakers to celebrate the contributions of women. Moreover, establishing these types of relationships is a way to build sustainable age-friendly practices. The need to raise awareness about careers and aging and to expand workforce programs is clear. However, higher education should also consider that it can be a place that offers older adults encore career opportunities. Adults in the boomer education generation have the educational background and professional experience that higher education can draw on to support their educational mission in a variety of ways. For example, executive and residence programs, specialized adjunct faculty, academic tutors, career counselors, and other positions can be geared towards the support of teaching and learning at the institution. Extending age competency and intergenerational exchange are no doubt integral to being an age-friendly campus. But this needs to happen more in the classroom across the curriculum, and not just in gerontology and related programs. Higher education has made great strides in integrating information about gender, race, ethnicity, and other important personal and social distinctions into the curriculum. We now need to integrate aging content in courses across majors and the core curriculum in biology, business, humanities, environmental studies, political science, urban planning, and in my case, both forensics and chemistry. Although aging research is happening, there are opportunities to expand it, such as moving beyond typical research models to more age-friendly, community-based participatory approaches. So one form that this could take is for institutions to partner with their neighboring communities on research that examines the needs of their aging populations or helps to evaluate age-focused programs. Many campuses report that retired faculty and alumni are connected with their campus through formal and informal programs. However, one insight that we took from these examples was that while the efforts seemed to be age-friendly, they could be age-segregating as well. What does that mean? It means that some of the efforts existed at the margins and were not recognized as part of either a department or campus's assets or amenities. Furthermore, other faculty didn't know much about them or were not actively engaged with them. So this is all a good reminder that being an age-friendly campus is more than just having programs with an aging focus. It's really about developing a culture of inclusion, appreciation, and recognition of age diversity that brings together the younger and older members of your campus and community in meaningful ways. Joann is now going to talk about how to join the AFU network and will offer a few final thoughts about why we believe this is an important initiative. Joann?
Thanks, Kim. So you've heard a lot more, and I hope we have provided some convincing arguments for you that we know that our campuses need to be more age-friendly. And we also have a great framework to guide how our institutions can go about doing this. So now what? Well, now we invite you and your institution to become a global partner. And listed here are a streamlined set of recommendations for becoming an AFU partner. In the resource materials that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that are posted in the GoToWebinar panel, you'll find more detailed information about the process for joining the AFU network. This information is also posted on the AGI website. But rather than going through the details of these steps, I want to point out a few things for you to keep in mind as you think about pulling together your AFU initiative at your campus. Your AFU efforts are going to likely be spearheaded by faculty or a center in gerontology or aging studies or a related program. However, AFU members suggest that in pulling together your effort, it's important to put together a planning team that tries to include colleagues from other disciplines or programs as a first step in moving towards a more, quote, campus-wide vision. For example, AFU members have reached out to colleagues in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, as well as their centers for community-based learning, continuing education and professional studies, and lifelong learning. So this is a great opportunity to reach across campus. And in using this campus-wide lens, AFU members have found that pulling together their initiative was really a great chance to explore what's already happening across departments and programs. And it's also a great way to connect with colleagues who may not be aware of what's happening elsewhere and what's happening in your program. It's also a good way to show the administration that there's already a lot going on in your campus and a lot to build on to broaden the AFU approach. And this can also help to identify gaps, which can turn into new opportunities. So what we suggest is that you compile a list of examples of what's already happening on your campus, or what we say is mapping the principles, and that you use this information in your proposal to your administration and to other faculty colleagues to endorse the age-friendly university principles and join the network. So in short, we say, showcase what is happening rather than what should happen, and play to your institutional strengths rather than institutional weaknesses. In planning how to move your proposal forward, AFU members also suggest that it's useful to start at the top and work from the bottom. And what they mean by this is that you want to start with a conversation with your administration to see if they would welcome the proposal to endorse the principles. And if that's a positive response, with this sentiment in hand, it can be a great incentive for faculty to come together around the initiative. And it's also important to recognize that the final endorsement needs to come from your president or provost or whoever your lead administrator is at your campus. As I said before, even if your AFU effort is being spearheaded by a specific unit like a gerontology program or a psychology department, the age-friendly concept is a campus-wide vision. And so the endorsement from the administration is an important step in the direction. And I also think it's important to remind ourselves that gerontology at its core is multidisciplinary. And the AFU approach can help us reach this full potential by finding new ways to engage and connect with others across our campus. And in closing, I also want to point out a few ways that AGI is working to build and broaden the network and can support your efforts. AGI continues to collaborate with Dublin City University around age-friendly strategic planning. AGI representatives have attended 2 conferences thus far and have met with global partners to discuss what's happening on their fronts. And we will be continuing with that conversation and that exchange. AGI recently became an integrated unit of GSA. And so AFU institutions and colleagues are invited to become a member of AGI, which offers both individual and institutional memberships in coordination with GSA memberships. And you can find out more about membership opportunities if you go to the GSA and AGI website. AGI also recently established an AFU subcommittee that will organize efforts to support AGI AFU partners. As well, AGI AFU partners can share information via the AGI Connect online community and the AFU interest group that we're launching, as well as the AGI Exchange newsletter. And we're also in the process of developing AGI AFU resources in a resource library with the support of the Retirement Research Foundation. And this will include AGI resources on aging education, career development, and other age-friendly issues that we're exploring. And of course, we hope to see you in November at the GSA 2019 Annual Scientific Meeting in Austin, Texas, where you can meet and talk with AFU partners and share what's happening on your AFU campus. Nelson Mandela wisely tells us that education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. No doubt there are many changes worth making in the world these days, but we hope that you will agree that a more age-friendly approach to higher education is one such change that we need to make in our world and that we can easily make at our institutions with some collaborative efforts. To hear more about the AFU initiative and meet colleagues working on their AFU campus efforts, we invite you and your colleagues to join us for these upcoming webinars in February and in March. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being able to share information about the AFU initiative with you, and we look forward to speaking and connecting with you further. So now, moving along to our question and answer session, we offer this reminder that you can type and send questions using the questions feature on the dashboard that's accessible on the right side of your screen. We will not be using the raise hand feature today, so if you have a question, please be sure to use the question panel, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible, time permitting, during the webinar. Please also know that we will email responses to questions we don't have time to get to after the webinar. Also note that we're recording the session, and we will send an access link by email once the recording is available, and you'll be able to download a copy of the presentation of the slides today as well. You can go to www.geron.org/webinar for more details, and that's listed here on the slide.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joann and Kim. We are seeing some questions come in. So why don't we start with this one? How is the AFU initiative related to other age-friendly efforts?
Okay. Thanks, Judith. It's a great question. Well, an easy and obvious answer to that is the AFU pillars can be considered akin to the 8 age-friendly domains that were developed by the World Health Organization to guide communities in their evaluation of assets. But there are other interesting age-friendly efforts that have been emerging and developing their criteria and practices. One that some individuals may be familiar with is the Age-Friendly Business Initiative that's being launched. For example, the World Health Organization, in collaboration with AARP and various communities, have developed materials that offer practical advice and guidelines to help businesses be more age-friendly. And there are also local programs such as the retirementjobs.com program, which is local in Mass. They're national, but they also are located in Massachusetts. They actually have a certified age-friendly employer, CAFE, C-A-F-E program, that reviews and certifies organizations committed to being the best place to work for employees 50. And similar programs have been launched in communities and collaborations with local business partners and local business bureaus. So there's a lot of interesting organized work around age-friendly efforts, and if you look more at that work, you'll see that I believe that there's lots of overlap in how things are being approached, and so I think there's some great synergy that's happening out there in these age-friendly initiatives.
Wonderful. Okay. Here's another question. What are the specific needs of non-traditional aged students?
Great, another good question. I know in Kim's comments, she mentioned that one of the insights that we found from the responses of institutional representatives is that, although there's a lot happening, we could do more with respect to supporting non-traditional age students. So I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind with respect to that question. First, when I talk about non-traditional age students, okay, I'm thinking, 25 plus. So that's a very large age range. And so when you have that size group, you also expect that they vary across a number of dimensions. So certainly they differ with respect to age, but they also differ with respect to roles. So we have some people who are working, some people are parents, some people who are working parents. We have care providers, retirees, people occupying multiple roles. And they also enter higher ed with a variety of reasons. And so because of this diversity, their needs are diverse. And their needs include things like flexibility in course scheduling. So thinking about having online programs, hybrid programs, or other format options. I know there's been a lot of discussion in Massachusetts around competency-based credit opportunities. This non-traditional age students also are going to need educational support, especially if they've been out of the educational world for a while. And they also need, I guess I would describe it as campus support. Often they're commuters, so sometimes being on campus, they can feel segregated or isolated. And so we want to think about ways to be able to integrate non-traditional age students more into the culture of our colleges. But I also would make the argument that even though we may think about these needs as specific to non-traditional age students, they're really relevant to all of our students. Students, at least at Lasell for sure, need to work to pay for tuition. They're assisting with care of family members. They're also commuters. So I'd like to make the argument that building age-friendly practices into our campus culture and our campus curriculum offer support that can be of value for students of all ages, whether we describe them as traditional age students, non-traditional age students, younger students, or older students.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions asking about copies of the slides. So I'll just take a moment, Joann, to share with the attendees that this webinar is being recorded. So that's one option. You'll have access to the recording as soon as tomorrow. But the copy of the slides and actually the script as well will be available for download from the GSA webinar webpage. If you'd like a copy now, just a friendly reminder to everyone, you'll find in the GoToWebinar panel a place where you can download handouts. There are 2. And moving along to the next question, we have several asking sort of around what AFU principles are considered the hardest to meet?
Another good question. Just to remind people that in the data that Kim presented, it's important to note that at least for the folks that we spoke with, the representatives that we surveyed, there was an indication that most principles in some form could be met or developed further at their campuses. But there were a few that people noted were, in their minds, perhaps harder than others. One of them was the first principle, which is to remind people to encourage the participation of older adults in all the core activities of the university, including education and research programs. Representatives said that they thought that this was perhaps a challenging principle because it was hard to know what was meant by all core activities at their institution. And they could see that they could have access, to some, even many, but they weren't sure if like all activities would be the kinds of things that would be accessible at their institution. I think the insight that we gained from looking at their responses is that, there is a real history or culture of age segregation that's led to the development of certain resources that didn't think about age diversity when they were developed. So, for example, some of the athletic and fitness facilities, maybe even some of your classroom spaces, aren't as age friendly as you would have them be. Nina Silverstein and Marilyn Gallucci will talk a little bit more about being able to evaluate that kind of space later in their webinars, so we can get back to that as well. Some representatives also noted that, you've seen one older adult, you've seen another older adult, which means that when we try to address interests and needs of an age-diverse student population or an age-diverse audience on our campus, we're talking about students, faculty, staff, alumni, community, and that's a broad audience. And so there's going to take some planning, some staff, some resources and funding to mount and deliver the kinds of programs that we think will be useful and valuable for them. From my personal experience, when I think about these types of issues, what I would say, though, is that, keep in mind that the AFU framework is aspirational and should encourage what's possible at your institution. And so here I think the idea of looking at quality over quantity may be a good guiding recommendation. We want to be able to do what we can do and do that well. Another principle that some representatives described is hard to meet, which I actually found surprising at first glance, but I think I get it, which was Principle 5, to widen access to online educational opportunities for older adults to ensure that there's diverse routes of participation. Many institutions or many respondents said that online educational opportunities are happening on their campus, although they're in varied stages of development at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. Some are certainly going full speed ahead with online programs, but they felt that the programs that are presently in place were really geared towards, the traditional students and hadn't really thought about an age-diverse audience as part of that focus. And so more needs to be done to make the argument about why online programs, at least some of them, can be tailored in better ways to the needs and interests of a more age-diverse student population.
Great, thank you. And tagging on to sort of this quality and quantity measurements, there are a couple of questions around, cost. There appears there's no cost for this designation or application. How long does it take to get approval? Is there an evaluation process? Those are just some of a little summary of the kinds of questions coming in.
Right. You'll see in the handout that we made available, there's a little FAQ section, and it asks about costs. And we've always said at this point, there is no cost to join the network. So at this point, the process for joining the network is to do an internal proposal to your administration and evaluation. And people have done this in various ways. Some are very, very detailed. Some are more streamlined. So you need to do what works best for you. And then your letter of endorsement is sent to the AFU coordinator at Dublin City University, our colleague Christine O'Kelly, who then passes it on to the president of DCU, who will write a welcome letter. So at this point, there is not a cost. However, at the last conference at the AFU University, the partners and advisory council spoke about as this initiative grows and gets bigger and requires more organizational support, we may need to think about some type of a membership model. So that is on the table, but we have no information about that at this point. With respect to evaluation, that question has come up in many different ways. And at this point, there isn't a formal process by which AFU organizers look back at institutions and say, are they holding true to the principles? At this point, the principles are there for institutions to use in good faith. And to use to inspire and encourage and think creatively about ways to be more age integrated. We hope that being able to share information at our GSA AGI conferences and the other ways that we are building to communicate will build in ways that people can kind of self-evaluate and keep on top of their work. This doesn't mean that at some point we won't have some ways to help institutions evaluate what they're doing. Again, in the third webinar that you're going to hear about, Nina Silverstein and Marilyn Gallucci are going to talk about a pilot audit method that is being developed at UMass that can help institutions in their evaluation of AFU efforts. I should also mention that the AGI journal, Gerontology and Geriatrics Education, is having a special issue that will be coming out shortly on AFU efforts. And in there, you'll be able to read about what AFU partner institutions are doing on their campuses to develop and evaluate programs. And there will also be a paper describing the AFU audit that people will find very useful to be able to use internally at their institutions.
Thank you. And a couple of questions asking for just touching upon again, sort of, the buy-in, making the case. How do you see AFU increasing the interest of college students to enter these fields?
Well, again, I think that's going to be up to institutions to be able to promote and advocate that. But I think what I find very useful to it is that, this campus-wide vision of it, it kind of now this is an opportunity for us to not have it be isolated in a particular program, but to be able to show students that this is an important issue that applies to them personally and professionally. And so it's a way to kind of integrate it and normalize it across the curriculum. I think we also want to think about that, at our recent GSA symposium, Des O'Neill, who was our discussant, said, we're not trying to make institutions simply for older adults. We're trying to make institutions for an age-diverse population, which means that we bring in individuals from lots of different sectors. So this is a way to also integrate more alumni in programs, more community members in programs, retired faculty, if you have a university-based retirement community with which you partner. And so by bringing all those pieces together in a more campus-wide way, I think really just normalizes things and makes it so that students don't see this as an exception or something unique, but it's part of what will be important, what is important in their lives, and can see the opportunities that it could provide.
Excellent. Before I ask the last question for today, Joann, I'll just take a moment to share with the audience. A webinar survey will automatically launch after the webinar. So in an effort for continual improvement, we'd like to hear your thoughts. So please provide feedback by clicking the survey link at the end of the webinar. And with that, the last question for today, a number of questions around, are you including institutions outside the U.S.? Who are some of the institutions that are already participating? Where can we find information about that and staying connected? In particular, how can people contact you?
Great, I love that question. If you Google Augie AFU, you will find a link to the Augie Wedge page at Augie AFU web page, and you will see the list of institutions that are presently members. There we have approximately, I think there's probably about 45 institutions, but I also know that we have received endorsements recently from a few others that have not been posted yet. And if you look at the list, you'll see that it's kind of east and west of the US, as well as in Ireland, South Korea, England, the Netherlands, Canada, Slovak Republic, where else? Did I say South Korea? So it really is a global international group. I would say about half of the institutions are now US institutions, and this is growing. So it's really exciting. I also think it's important for people to recognize, as Kim mentioned, is that although it's called the AFU, Age-Friendly University Initiative, you don't need to be a university to be a member. You can be a community college, and in fact, we have a community college that is a member, or you could be a four-year institution. We have some institutions that are primarily graduate institutions as opposed to undergraduate or undergraduate and graduate institutions. So this encompasses institutions devoted to higher education, which are also a diverse group.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joann and Kim, for bringing us this program today, the first of a three-part series. And this is the end of our program.
Oh, thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be able to have your attention today, and we hope to hear from you.